You're listening to Radio Free Radio.
Radio Free Stein presents Short Sentences by Gertrude Stein with Madame Boucher, Natalie, Amelia, Babette, Eugene, Joseph, Edmund. The scene is one in which nicely they go.
Madame Boucher,
Oh, yes?
will you come?
But I do.
I have been able to come.
Babette,
Eugene,
I ask you,
Edmund.
will you?
Is he better because you bring what you bring?
You bring
When you do come?
More Short Sentences by Gertrude Stein with Alvaro, Robert, Henry, Mrs. Andre, Pocket, Helen, John, Ferdinand, Mildred, Aldrich. And so they are all not alike.
That was the first track, Nicely They Go, from Radio Free Stein's rendering of Gertrude Stein's play Short Sentences with music by Sam Shalabi. You'll be hearing more tracks from that piece in this episode of Radio Free Radio. Hi, I'm Adam Frank, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks also to the Public Humanities Hub at the University of British Columbia for supporting this series. If you'd like to listen to previous episodes to hear more about the Radio Free Stein project and its musical interpretations of Gertrude Stein's plays, you can find links on the project website. That's radiofreestein.com/plays/broadcasts. Today, I'm very pleased to be speaking with Montreal-based composer and musician Sam Shalabi. Before I introduce Sam, I want to say a few words about the Stein play that we worked on together, Short Sentences. If you want to get a sense of the play as I talk about it, please click on the link at the bottom of the YouTube broadcast page that you're on. It's going to show up quite large, so you may want to reduce the size of the image if you're clicking on that link. Gertrude Stein wrote Short Sentences in the summer of 1932. That is, it's from the middle phase of her playwriting, not one of the early conversation or parlor plays that we've been listening to in previous episodes. Several other plays from this time share its striking visual feature, the long column of names on the left and a column of dialogue on the right. By my count, there are 545 names in this play. So the first question for a reader probably is, what do you do with all these names? Do you really have to cast 545 people in order to perform this play? That's a choice more or less taken by Francesco Gagliardi in his beautiful half-hour film based on this play. He filmed people, different people, each saying one of the sentences and then edited them all together. There's a truly amazing array of faces and persons with different accents and appearances, and the overall effect is moving, soothing, and generous as they struggle to pronounce Stein's sentences with some kind of meaning or intention. You can find a link to the YouTube version of this film on the Radio Free Stein website. But the names basically disappear in this interpretation. They show up only in the credits at the end. And when we discussed the play in a workshop held at UBC in spring of 2016, we decided that we wanted to keep the names more present. They seemed important for the play. So we started thinking about the different ways that you can use a person's name in speech, whether as a form of address, or as an introduction, or as some kind of attribution. These are all distinct performative uses of names. I'm using the term performative in the sense that J.L. Austin famously developed it in his series of lectures, How to Do Things with Words. Stein's plays help us think about how linguistic performativity intersects with the more theatrical meanings of the term. And these, I think, are connected through what Austin calls the total speech situation. So we began to think about those situations or circumstances in which you might hear a list of spoken names. So, for example, introducing actors at the top of a radio drama. Or maybe in an airport, you might hear a public announcement in which names are called to a gate. Stein's own situation during the summer of 1932 when she wrote this play was interesting. That spring, she had rediscovered an old manuscript she had written 30 years earlier, a short novel called QED, based on a love affair she had had with someone named May Bookstaver around 1900. The story she wrote involved a love triangle, and in that story, the Gertrude character was eventually excluded from that triangle. Ulla Dido, the great Stein scholar and editor, noticed that the manuscript of Stanzas in Meditation, which was a long series of poems that Stein wrote that summer, just before Short Sentences, that the manuscript was quite different from the typescript. The word may, which shows up very frequently in the manuscript, both as a verb and as a noun, as in the month of May. In the typescript, it was replaced by other words like can or April. And Dido suggests that Stein changed the word may because her partner, Alice Toklas, felt threatened by this ancient, long ago love of Gertrude's that was somehow summoned or brought back by rediscovering the manuscript. So in the manuscript for Short Sentences, it turns out that the names May and also Mary show up very frequently, and they're always underlined in Toklas's purple pencil. So in the radio script that I eventually developed out of long conversations with Sam, who then used the script to write the music, I thought of the situation of the play as a writer recalling past loves, recollecting or summoning old acquaintances. Think about how easy it can be to fall in love with a name, even more than with a person sometimes, and how these flitting feelings of love can motivate writing or the process of composition. In the play, we see many encounters between the writer and a sequence of muses, more and less seductive, phantasmatic, real, and there are competing roles in the voices the writer hears in her head. There seem to us to be multiple love triangles, as the voices do or do not acknowledge their independence from and dependence on one another, the rivalry between her various competing muses, Alice or May, and how these eventually do or don't get resolved. So I think that's probably enough to give you some context for the piece as we understood it. I want to introduce Sam Shalabi now. He's an Egyptian-Canadian composer and improviser. Beginning in punk rock in the late 1970s, Sam's work has evolved into a fusion of experimental, modern Arabic music that incorporates traditional Arabic, shabi, noise, classical, text, free improvisation, and jazz. Sam and I are old friends and have collaborated on a couple of other projects, including Overpass of Melodrama that was released on CD by Alienate Records in 2007, and Some Mad Scientists. So welcome, Sam. Glad to have you.
Hello, hello.
So this isn't the first time you and I have worked together on a kind of word music project. I think when we first met in the early 90s, you were still thinking pretty seriously about writing rather than music. And I think I may be one of the only people to have read your novel. What was it called again, the novel?
This is the Good News.
Yes, This is the Good News.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you can say something about why you like to work really with words and music together, and especially, you know, whether and how Stein's words appeal to you as a composer.
I mean, when I started music, I started music and writing together, I mean, in tandem. So there, for years, I was sort of trying to navigate between doing the two at the same time, and it sort of was difficult because I would kind of, the more I got into one, the less I was able to focus on the other, and so that sort of came to a head when I went to Arizona, because I went to Arizona to research something that I was writing, and kind of just had a weird epiphany that I didn't want to do that anymore. That there was something about music that I wanted to kind of mind or focus on more. But my sort of the way that I compose is very, very much informed by whatever I learned, you know, or whatever I kind of, you know, sort of picked up in when I was writing fiction or writing poetry, and it's still very informed by that, but or very influenced by other people's writing, you know, and so I like the techniques and the strategies writers use for writing music, and plus I don't really like to you know, I find it more interesting and more of a kind of a thing to open up and to kind of I guess I don't know if a problem to solve is the right way to put it, but I find it a more rich process to write music that isn't necessarily influenced by music, you know, and so still, yeah, I mean, and I'm very, very influenced by writing, and I like to sort of try and figure out how those two things can be combined, and what that how they resonate off of each other. So with Stein, I mean, Stein is someone that I very elliptically have read here and there for years. I've there's a lot of the sort of modernist writers I know better, I guess, and it's really, I guess, through you, that I kind of got to know her writing more and more, and obviously with this uh, project, kind of dove deep into one facet of her writing, and the process. I mean, this is it's a sort of hard thing to talk about, but the process was very, very illuminating, and I think it was illuminating well after the fact, because I think that for me with Stein, that the writing, there's a key there, at least for me, there's a key to her writing that it's only after I had some distance from what we did with it, because I think what we ended up doing was a challenge, in a way, and it was a challenge that we kind of set out for ourselves, I mean, in parallel, with what you were doing and what I was doing, and so that challenge and that kind of task really filled up the space of what I could say about her writing, until recently when I kind of went back and listened to what we did, and then and as I sort of mentioned before to you, that was a real epiphany. It was a real thing where I went, okay, and I sort of finally understood what we were doing in a strange way, and anyway, yeah, I was very happy with what I heard, and it took the distance of being away from what, as you know, turned out to be a pretty arduous and very intense process, that was yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk. I think a little more about that process, I hope, a little later. But I mean, what you're saying sounds completely right and appropriate to me in terms of Stein's writing, because so many of us encounter Stein's writing, and maybe those of us who get interested in it don't really understand why we're getting interested in it. It's not. It's you can't put it into other words very easily what she's saying, and you're kind of find yourself in some slightly altered state, I think, as you experience it, which of course, is part of what I hear you saying in terms of having trouble describing what you were getting out of it when you were doing it, but then later on it seems to have had some effect. I mean, I'm thinking about the psychedelic aspects of your composition, and also of Stein's writing, the psychedelic in the sense of that original sense of altered states of perception. And that must be partly what you were encountering in Stein's writing, and then wanting to make your own psychedelic experience available in the music. Can you say something about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I know, that for me the word is such a good it's such a good tool, and it's such a good sort of MO, to have, because it's a good way to help you navigate through in a fairly open way, to kind of see if you can circle the square or square the circle of material, that like, what do I do with this seemingly this thing that I don't understand? What do I do with it in such a way that I'm not trying to necessarily control it, or sort of box it in, or kind of take whatever is mysterious, or kind of recondite about it, and how do I sort of come to it, and so I think, like, psychedelic, if you have that approach, it's a good tool that doesn't necessarily align you to any particular ideology necessarily, at least, I mean, except the ideology of psychedelia. So, but it doesn't put you in any particular school of, I'm going to do this with this material because this is what I know to do. So with Stein's writing, the result of it I think that's kind of, you know, why it's so pleasing, the result, because it is psychedelic. I mean, the result of what we did certainly is, because her language is, it kind of, it sort of dehabituates the language, right? And so it forces you to kind of go, okay, well, how do I treat this? And the decisions that I made in terms of setting this writing to music, again, we're kind of, in a sense, trying to treat it, to not do anything with it, to sort of let it resonate on its own. And I think music is a really good tool to do that, you know, to preserve whatever is strange and uncanny about words, and music can do that, and vice versa. Words do that too. And I think that's the kind of thing that I really like about this, is that it is a symbiotic relationship, that her words make sense, at least to me. They make sense as with musically. I mean, you know, in a kind of sort of, I guess, describing it in that basic way. And then, but then what her words do to the music is really, really interesting as well. I mean, it defamiliarizes this music. And so and I think the thing that was nice that we did was we didn't try to accommodate the music in some way, and we didn't try and accommodate the text in some way. We just sort of let them interact, and it certainly was an experiment in the sense, right? And so I think that, at least to my ears, I think it worked in that it preserves this uncanniness, it preserves sort of the strangeness, and yeah. But again, as I said, I mean, you know, when I sort of talk about it in terms of psychedelia, that it circles the square, or it squares the circle. It puts the frame around it so that it preserves all of the whatever that is, and yet it has some coherency.
So let's play a couple of tracks so that listeners who may not have heard this piece can get more of a sense of what we're talking about in terms of the psychedelia and the framing, and the putting the words and the music on the same kind of plane. These two tracks are from near the beginning. In the script, they're part of the evocation or invitation to listeners to kind of settle themselves in. You can see the words on pages 318, 319 in the play text. We ended up using 12 very different soloists, as well as a choir in this piece, and I'll eventually list everyone's names later in the episode. The two tracks you're about to hear are called Neither of Which and She May Be Seen, Needless to Say.
Just the place made by
So you can, I think you can really begin to hear the great variety of voices here, the choir as well as the number of soloists. I think we ended up having something like 60 people involved in this production. It's really like a huge number. So Sam, tell me what's going on musically here. Can you tell us what went into the compositional choices you're making at this point?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of things. There's not one sort of set of choices, but I mean that I wanted it to kind of start. I mean, literally, what I wanted to do is almost have it be like a kind of not necessarily take the most obvious kind of modernist language that you would get, because usually I think that with Stein and a lot of the writers from that particular period, that when they're set to music, they will sort of take the what kind of the modernist choices of music from that period, and it's still fairly common thing that that you have like the sort of Schoenberg kind of 12-tone thing happening, and then you have sort of these sort of particular settings, is almost as if that's what you're supposed to do when you have weird modernist texts, that you're supposed to make go for these obvious sort of things on the shelf. And so I wanted to kind of assume that no, this is like could be like a Broadway musical, but instead of necessarily using that language, my idea was to use kind of the Laurel Canyon kind of sound at the beginning, and then progressively have that sort of go on its own path, as the text sort of dictated that. And so the people like Judy Sill, and those kinds of harmonies, and the Beach Boys, that's what I wanted to kind of explore, partially because as you pointed out in the intro, even though the language is kind of strange, there is an emotional narrative going on here. There's a story, there's a love story going on in this, and so a kind of a strange love story in a way. Well, actually, the story itself is not strange, but the way that it's presented is strange. And so I wanted to just assume, well, no, this has an emotional resonance, even though I might not get it, even though from the necessarily I'm assuming that it doesn't. I think it's there, even in from what I understand of the way the text is presented. So that was initially the choices that I made for that beginning, for those series of beginnings.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the two of us sitting down and reading over the play over many hours, trying to isolate the kind of the feelings that we thought each of these scenes might have in them. Because the scenes, if you look at the play, you can kind of delineate or distinguish the scenes between when the chorus shows up. So we just sort of said, whenever the chorus shows up, that will be one separation of one scene from the next. And so we use those distinctions to kind of generate categories, I guess, emotional categories. So what's going on in this scene, what's going on in that scene. And that's how we develop the sort of the set of emotional arcs. And I think then you kind of made your... Yeah, I like Judy Sill. I like thinking about this as a kind of almost there's some 70s gonzo thing happening. Some of your the choices here that and then in the next section you kind of go to electronics. So I think maybe we'll because we have a mix of instruments here, but the next section I want to give listeners a taste of the electronic music that you composed. The primary singer you're about to hear is Elizabeth Lima. She plays the part of the muse named May in her first appearance. And she's singing with the Monday Night Choir, directed by Dina Sindrick. So the track is called But Why Should She See? And if you want to follow the text, it starts on page 319 in the playtext.
But which they start, but not with them in part. She may be mine as a child. St. John's, John Nichols, Stein so far, Vriezen, as it does. She may be bought to call friend, Vriezen, in middle cases. But why should she see we can be better known? Random Lives, Ernest Johns, should we choose? But not left. And the chorus says, she must be just. She must be just. She must be just.
Yeah, that's a really gorgeous, gorgeous track. I was going to say maybe it's a gorgeous song, but it's not really a song. It's something, and it's short the way a song is short, but it's not a song because it's not structured the way a song is structured. So what would you say about what it is?
I mean, it is a song. Anything. I mean, in that, I guess anything can be a song in a way. But I mean, the thing that's part of the thing of the music interacting with the text. So it's really treating that these are a set of lyrics, and how do you kind of narratize this thing without necessarily trying to prod it, and taser it, into some thing that it shouldn't be. And so I think the structure of these pieces is very much, it's treating it almost in a kind of Lennon and McCartney kind of way, right? So there's these words, and how do you create something that feels song-like, but isn't necessarily trying to box one thing into another, that they're really in parallel and they're interacting with each other. So part of that, I think, the guy who really has a kind of influence, I mean, not totally, but is certainly influential in this thing is Morton Feldman, because there's a repetitiveness clearly in at least in the meter of the words, right? And yet there's subtle differences that are going on, even if these are just a bunch of names that are being kind of recited on paper, that there is a musicality to them. And how do you look at maybe a larger structure, of a kind of a narrative structure, again, that is appropriate or makes the words resonate and makes the music resonate. And so that's, in terms of the sort of discrete shaping mechanism or strategy within the piece, that's part of it. So again, it's that thing that I was saying at the beginning, that when we did it, it was such a intense process, and it was a kind of a thing, well, how do we do this? And you don't, in a sense, I mean, when you do something like this, you don't know really if you've made the right choices. But I think the cool thing is that after the fact, I think we did. I think, and I think there is a kind of appropriateness to that approach, even though it seems strange.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny you should mention, Feldman, because Feldman talks about Stein and his writings, and she's, I think, an important person to talk about. Another composer who's, interested in writing. I mean, he talks about, how music should become more literary, by which he doesn't necessarily mean use words, but he means something.
Sure.
And people use the word abstract, and they sometimes talk about Stein's writing in relation to abstraction and Feldman's writing in relation to abstraction, but actually I think it's not true. I think it's something about how incredibly discrete and anti-associative both Stein's writing and Feldman's music is, that makes us want to call it abstract, but I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just the intensity of the discreteness of it that requires then that we give up the expectations that we might have brought to listening to music or to reading. And that has something to do with genre. So I wanted to say something about how your music and also how Stein's plays in general really never conform to genre expectations, right? That discreteness means that they may use genre, they may use an expectation, but then they kind of explode the expectation in the next use of a word or in the next note or in the next moment. And that's a huge part of her overall project, right? She's such an anti-genre writer in some way. So I'm wondering if you can say something about when you move to music, where reception of music is so thoroughly structured by expectations and genre expectations. It is in literature too, but in music, it feels like it's even more structured by expectations of that kind. It's even when it's a genre like experimental or avant-garde, when it becomes a genre. And somehow this piece, I don't think this piece really necessarily creates expectation. People might not know what to do with it as a piece generically.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Feldman's big thing, which I think is a very, very big thing in general in music and any art, but in music it becomes more sort of clear that it's a kind of sort of a habit that people fall into, is memory. That Feldman's big thing was he wanted to find other ways of expectation and what sort of time temporality, what you come to expect, right, from hearing a note that just happened. Oh, this should happen, and maybe it doesn't happen, or maybe it happens 40 times, and the same note. And so I think the great thing about Feldman is that he kind of short-circuited that, in his own compositions. He said, well, no, there's yes, there's these 4 or 5 ways of composing music, which it seems like, right? I mean, that's not true, but when you look at kind of what is possible, in terms of structure and composition, it's easy to kind of look at other disciplines, right? You can look at painting, or you can look at fiction or poetry and go, wow, that structure is sort of discrete and kind of indigenous to that particular art form. And isn't that cool that they can do that they can experiment in, with text and words in that way, and expectation and memory. But there's no reason why you can't take that and somehow apply it to music, right? And not necessarily figuring out in terms of the sort of the nuts and bolts of music itself. How do you translate? How do you take something that is non-musical in a kind of, sort of, I don't know if synesthesia would be the right word, but we're, that you go, well, that's a really cool structure. That's a very interesting literary structure. And that's a very interesting experiment with literary structure. How do you do that in music? And so I think the problem with music, sometimes is that it hardens and solidifies into a style, which I guess is the problem with any sort of art form. But in music, because you're dealing with rhythm and meter, and particularly you're dealing with memory. I mean, in music, and a kind of and time. Obviously, temporality is really important in music. That you get stuck in those, right? You get stuck in these sort of patterns, and it's surprising how shocking that can be to people when you go, well, no, I'm going to tweak this a little bit, or try something else. And but that's the fun stuff. That's the fun thing to do.
Yeah. It's very Steinian, the stuff you're talking about in terms of temporality. That's very much absorbed in her part of what she's up to. And let's play a few more tracks from the middle of the piece. it starts around page 323 in the play text, if you're following. In the script, I suggested that in this next part, we get the introduction of the writer's voice, who's trying to understand the conflict that's taking place between the muse and the other characters or voices. So the 3 tracks you're about to hear, it'll be about 6 or 7 minutes. They're called Who Will Tell What to Do, If They Are Cautious, and She May Be Sent For Just As She Is.
Martin Jonas.
Jonathan Carpet.
Harry Allen.
Agnes Elliott.
Who will be like that?
John Angel.
Bertha Euston.
Margaret Barnes.
She judges best.
Jonathan Carpet.
Martin. Emmanuel Dearborn.
Agnes
Marmion
Elliott.
Plain.
Winifred North.
Martin
It
Jones.
is all bold as stated.
John Angel.
August.
Jonathan Carpet.
Harry Allen. Martin
Agnes
Jones.
Elliott.
John
Winifred
Emmanuel
North.
Dearborn.
Marmion Plain.
James Coventry.
Who will be like that?
August. Martin.
Mary Glenn.
Winifred
Ways
North.
of after-guessing.
It is all which they
Leave
color.
more than they allow. She judges best.
It is ours if they ask.
It is all bold as stated, but they can change better for paper. But they can still better. Still better. It will be called ordered excellently.
It is ours if they ask.
But, well,
Who will they hold?
whether they
In
are
respect.
she
may
be
welcomed well.
it is often all sold. Which
Who
they
will tell
commence.
what to do?
Which will they tell?
It is to trust,
For which they welcome.
which they commence.
It is not likely.
It is not likely.
It is not likely.
Adam, Beach, Rose,
Agatha,
is
Brown,
war,
Arctic, Teresa, English,
but this is new.
birds of the face,
An
Halstead,
for which we
Hamilton, Herbert,
Really not neglect is done. Test for coming when they came. Just when the chance came.
Now join
She went to our shores on his precious. She will be anxious to leave. She may be strangely. May she be kind enough, obliged, who will fill them as well. It is just not
hostess Arnold Lane, Jonathan Banks, Bartholomew James, James Baskett, Agatha Holden, Conrad Waltz, Gladys Wells, Genevieve Gold, Jenny Blaine, Arthur Williams, Goodwin Hart,
For which they cause.
It is taught as an address.
For which do they and for which to which
he will be need presently. They will call not only there, but for them.
Maybe only trouble.
Please be our choice for choosing.
She may be invited to be welcome.
May she be told for which they went.
There's no cause for uneasiness, but just as well, for they establish.
For they establish. For they establish.
Dora Fortune, Darnell Blaine, Duncan Mays, Malcolm Smith, Roger Andrews, Nathan Starr, 49 miles of Peterton, just as Seymour.
May she be called that. She may be sent for just as she is.
It is of their may wish and not
Not but a Britain for whom they are anxious, just as often as when they were
She
there.
will be singularly softened by sound.
Will be because of it with him.
They will be as likely.
She will often be polite without her that they will be jealous.
When they come, they are not careless.
They will be
May she be tall and not seen.
of which they were in,
extraordinary. They will not blame. They will not blame.
They will not blame. May she be tall and not seen. So many good sentences. So tell us what we're hearing in these pieces in terms of the style. Is it square note singing, that last piece? Is that what it was doing?
Yeah, it's like a sort of shape note, sacred harp, or I guess what they call social singing. You know, I wanted to kind of, you know, somewhere in the middle. I you know, because of Stein and I wanted to kind of almost treat the dive into the kind of folkloric element of the words. You know, sort of almost see the words as sort of that they could be kind of images, you know, very discrete images of something, and you know, almost treat them almost as very specific talismans or symbols of something. So, you know, prior to this, you have a kind of exotic sound in the back, you know, of the, I guess, of the second track that we heard, which is kind of coming from sort of an African, you know, pygmy influence. I mean, and that was, to me, that kind of sort of references modernism in a way, in a very kind of tenuous way, you know, and then that goes into, of course, you know, sacred harp or shape note singing, which is very American, you know, too. I mean, it's a very American form of singing, and so all that I wanted to kind of, before the or as an element in what I was doing, reference these kind of sort of more obviously modernist things, but not dive completely into them. So, I don't know, that was part of it. And also just the fact that we had a choir, I really wanted to milk the choir.
Well, we didn't initially have a choir. That was what was funny. I thought initially we were going to have our 10 or 12 soloists, and they would be the choir, and then we got a choir, and suddenly we had 10, 12 soloists and a choir, which made everything yeah, really kind of changed the conditions for, I guess, what you were making musically.
Yeah, thank God for Dina Sendrick, which I mean, she helped so much with the, because I had no idea. I mean, we, that was, I think, when we first discussed this, over coffee. I was like, choir, we must have a choir, and then we were like, no, that's just too crazy, or whatever.
Too much.
That's too much, and then it kept sort of coming back, and then finally, Dina and her Monday night choir, there was this choir that we could use actually, and we just dove into it, and it just is. I mean, it just gives it such a cool and appropriate effect, and.
So what I'm just gonna let's move on to the sort of final series of tracks. I think we're gonna listen to this sort of almost jazzy bit where Sarah Albu is the soloist. But then I think right after that, if Josh, you can also give us the very final track, track 22, after track. So in other words, join clip 5 and clip 6, but skip track 21. And I just want to, before you do that, just name the people who you've been listening to. And this is my own sort of performance of the list of names, like short sentences. So the voices you've been hearing on these tracks and elsewhere are Sarah Albu, Mark Andrew Hamilton, Kate Bevan Baker, Catherine Black, Nils Brown, Emma Elburn, Isaac Goldschneider, Elizabeth Lima, Marie-Claire Saint-Don, and Jake Smith. And you've also been listening to the Monday Night Choir, directed by Dina Sendrick. And the musicians who you've been hearing were and are Patrick Conan on drums, Jonah Fortune on bass, Guido Del Fabro on violin, Jean-Christophe Lizotte on cello, Sarah Page on harp, Julia Pozzi on viola, and Sam on electronics. We recorded this at Break Glass Studios in Montreal in the fall of 2017 with the indispensable help of sound engineer Jace Lassick, without whom none of this would have been possible. So thanks, Jace, for all that. So if you can just play the last 2 tracks, that'd be great.
They tell, for
have been listening to Short Sentences by Gertrude Stein. This Radio Free Stein production has featured Muriel Head,
She may be thought.
May Shipman,
It is more than idle.
Hiram Flood,
They may be caught close.
Hilda Lamb,
For which they think.
Henry Martin,
Could they be relieved by them?
Marius Williams,
It is often that they call it a lie.
Barbara Blaine,
Should she misuse and treasure?
Ferdinand Wills,
It is always best to be taught.
Jenny Sheridan,
Think more than they will do.
Grace Fellows,
It is not why they ask.
Martin Lane,
All which they have, they can.
Guy Mann,
It is often by themselves thoughtful.
Herbert Blaine.
All which they come to have.
Mary Care.
It is ours to have ours known.
Howard Blaine.
All which they think.
Hector Strings.
Might it be well on the chat?
Edith Brown.
It is more likely in time.
Dennis Rowe.
She will be nearly in their way.
Margaret Elk.
Should she leave the door open?
Bernard May.
If she could easily be influenced.
May Blaine.
Or for themselves.
Minnie Blaine.
Or may they be always alike?
Dora Fisher.
Which it is lost.
Donald Roll.
May they be left as courteous. David Grace,
She may be thought as well.
Louis Blick.
Will she be told?
Louise Thorne,
Not if without their hold.
Nellie Blaine,
Should it be nicely now?
and May Helen.
If it likes. By them. By them.
So we are coming to the very end of this episode. We won't have time, unfortunately, for the Q&A that we like to have. But in the last minute or two, we kind of end with this more jazzy sort of noise improv moment. Sam, what do you want to say about these last two pieces, if anything?
Well, I think the one that we started with is, I mean, for me personally, is one of my favorite things in the whole thing, just because I think it sort of ties it's, I guess it's for me, it's a climax of the piece in a weird way, because it sort of ties it to the beginning of the sonically to the piece, and also just the words in this particular case really pushed what I was doing into a kind of place, and for me an interesting place, and that the idea was to write something that was almost like a kind of a Beach Boys / Judy Sill type of melody, but it kind of pushed that out in so that the form is kind of follows the words in a way, and I find the result really interesting. So it's something I would never have thought of or come up with on my own. So it's happy about that.
Yeah, it sounds great, and I really appreciate the performance that Sarah put in.
Yeah, she sounds incredible on it.
Yeah. So, well, I want to thank you for helping us, give some context for the piece, and helping me understand this Stein play, which is, of course, my own sort of personal agenda in all of this. And I also just want to thank the listeners and let them know that we'll be having one more episode of this season of Radio Free Radio in 2 weeks' time with Daniel Thomas Davis, and the only actual opera that we produced, that Radio Free Stein produced as part of this. So one more time, thanks to Sam, and hope that you'll tune in next time. Tuning out for now.